Hiya. I hope some people are here and able to see me. Let's have a look. All right. So bear with me. I'm just going to set a few things up and we'll see how it goes. Hi, welcome everyone. Let's just chill out for a few minutes and see if other people want to join. Bonjour. Bonjour, hello, wherever you are. Welcome. Bienvenue. I'm just trying to pretend I can actually speak French, whereas that's pretty much exhausted my French vocabulary there. Oh, well, I hope you're all well. We'll get started properly in a sec. So as you're watching, as we're waiting for people to join, just take it easy, relax, make yourself comfortable. Hi, hello. If you do have any questions, write them in the comment section. I believe I'm able to, I'm just trying to see how this works. Finish. Oh, what's that do? Oh no, that ends the call. I better not do that. So I'm just looking at the interface because I think if I want to, okay. If you have any questions, do put them in the comments and then I would have a go at answering them best I can. Did I ever feel fear on my journey? That's a good question. You know, for me, on my spiritual journey, for some reason, I didn't really feel fear as a part of my spiritual journey, but I know that perhaps is quite unusual. A lot of the people who I've helped through this process, often they go through a period of a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, as their sense of self feels like it's slipping away from them. And actually what's happened is their belief in who they are is slipping away from them. But who you really are, or the essence of what you are, never really slips away. So there's nothing to be afraid of. But the mind will often churn out lots of fears. For me, for some reason, I wasn't really that afraid on my journey, my spiritual journey. I was afraid of things during my spiritual journey, but nothing to do with my spiritual journey, just like afraid of other things happening in life. You know, maybe I was nervous about this or worried about something else. Oh, some other questions. Oh my gosh, here we go. But yeah, I wasn't really afraid. And also for me, my transformation happened really slowly over a period of years. And my kind of waking up happened without me actually realizing. So I was seeking for many, many years. How many years? Over 15 years probably. And then towards the end of that, the seeking just kind of slowly fell away and the suffering slowly fell away. So it happened very gradually and very naturally. And I didn't have a teacher, and I don't know, there was nothing really for me to be afraid of. I really was able to kind of trust the process, I guess. But I think there were some aspects right at the beginning of my journey, actually. I'm remembering now, this is like going back 20 years now, where I remember thinking, gosh, I've got to sort of take a leap of faith, or I've got to take some kind of jump, and I couldn't do it. Like, a part of me really wanted to go off into the Himalayas and become a monk. And I just couldn't, you know, the other part of me didn't want to do that. The other part of me wanted to, you know, go to university, study, and find a way to earn a living. So that's what I ended up doing. And so I guess that kind of fear. Okay, how else are we doing with the questions here? Welcome, everyone. Hi. Thanks for joining. Thanks for coming along and watching. Edward, you made it at last. Fantastic. Really glad Edward's been trying to come along to one of my meetings for the last month, and we keep on missing each other. So I'm extra happy that you're here. Okay. Edith saying, because you never felt fear before your journey. Oh, gosh. That's annoying then, isn't it? If the actual spiritual journey can engender a lot of fear sometimes. Okay. Adam's got a question. I have a question, Top. Let's have a read. Okay. Shiva and Krishna consciousness. From my understanding, I thought Shiva is the supreme God in deity form, and when at the highest level, I forgot the Sanskrit name. Then when it comes to the Gita and Krishna, the followers claim that Krishna is the Godhead Supreme. Also, I thought that Krishna was an incarnate of Vishnu. And then the last sentence is, I guess that they are both pointing to the same thing. I'm just interested to hear your views. Okay, it might sound like, to some people listening to that might sound like quite a conceptual question, because we're talking about different levels of godliness, you know, like my God trumps your God. You know, I believe, and you get some people, some Hindus are like that. Maybe they're followers of Krishna, and they will say Krishna is the supreme God, and Krishna is a higher God than Shiva, and they will be able to have an argument about that, and they will be able to quote scriptures, and same other way around. There'll probably be worshippers of Shiva who could probably come up with arguments and reasons why Shiva is the higher God, and so on and so on. And I don't worry about that kind of stuff too much. I sort of think they're pointing at the same thing, but I also think you can use the concept of God and your own version of God in a way that feels right for you. So some people say God is personal. So it's a personal God you can actually talk to, you can relate to, you can have a conversation with, you can pray to God, you can devote yourself to God. So there's a personal aspect to God. And other people say, no, God isn't personal. That's a lower form of God. And a higher form of God is impersonal. God maybe is Brahman or something like that. But I think, you know, these are just different ways, different approaches. And superficially or initially, they can be quite different. Maybe you believe that you're God. Maybe you believe that Krishna is the highest God. From my point of view, that's fine. You know, if that's where you're at, if that's your belief, then follow that belief, see where it takes you. And often you'll find it takes you to the same place. What I try not to get into is arguments, because there are different ways. There are different ways, and what can sometimes start off as quite narrow and sectarian can actually blossom and bloom into something quite wonderful and open, which is where I try and steer things, at least, because I think they're all pointing to the same thing. But God's a really interesting one, because some people will have a strong belief in God, and maybe a personal God, or maybe a particular deity, or a particular kind of divinity. And other people are positively allergic to the word God and to the concept of God. And in the very idea of surrendering to God can fill some people with real kind of resistance, real strong resistance. So I'm quite free and easy about the way we relate to these concepts. I think you can have a belief in God, you can have a belief in a personal God, and that's very beautiful. You can use the concept of a personal God without actually believing it, which is also very nice. Or you can not really be that interested in God, and that can work for you too. So yeah, that's the way I approach it. Adam, in your question, you mentioned the Gita. The Gita, I mean, the Gita is one of my favorite texts. It's probably the book that got me into sort of that and the Bible. These probably two books that got me into spirituality. And the Gita can be interpreted in so many different ways. I've studied the Gita in Sanskrit, and I mean, a lot of the translations are quite biased. So if you get it translated by somebody who thinks Krishna is the highest God, then they'll translate all the verses that make it sound like Krishna is the highest God. And if you get it translated by somebody who's maybe more into a Shankaran type interpretation of the Gita, where maybe the translator thinks that God is impersonal, then they will translate it to that way. But when you look at the Sanskrit, you realize the language is actually very loose. It's not very specific. They use the same words in different ways to mean different things. So just take a simple example like the Sanskrit word Atman, which generally means the self, meaning kind of the big self, or self with a capital S. But when you read the Gita, the word Atman is often used to mean me, as in the little me, as in the separate person. What in Sanskrit was often called the jiva is often referred to using the word Atman. So there isn't, the beauty of the Gita is that different people with different beliefs can read it and work with it. So that's one of the beauties of it. Obviously that creates problems as well, because it's not very specific and precise. It lends itself to different interpretations, and then people can start to fight over which one's best. So my general view is let other people follow their path. If you're seeking, if you're trying to figure all this stuff out, then follow your path. Get your head down and follow your path. Don't worry about too much about other people, because superficially all these different paths can appear to be very, very different. But when you're at the top of the mountain, so to speak, that's just like figuratively speaking, okay? When you're at the top of the mountain, you can see how all the paths come together. And actually, it's just the same thing in a different way. So there you go. That's a rather, I hope that answer works for you. Great. Let's see if there are any other questions. Okay, there's some sort of strong language going on as well in the comments. Nathan Hardy, what do you think of the law of attraction? Or does thinking positive thoughts and feeling good really attracts what's desired? Nathan, great question. Can I just ask you before I answer, what's your experience? Maybe you could type a response in the comments section. Law of attraction is really interesting because I think it works on different levels. I think there is something to the law of attraction personally. When I was in my earlier seeking days, I used to kind of look down upon those kinds of teachings because I thought I knew better. It was illogical and it didn't fit in with science, which is my background in a way. I came from a very scientific background. But actually, I think there's a lot of truth to the law of attraction, but it depends how it's presented. It can cause problems on the spiritual search. It can be beneficial as well. Yeah, Nathan, have you written anything there? Someone else has said, can I talk about money? I can talk about money. I'm sure I could. I will actually. Okay, I'll talk about money in a bit as well. And Edward saying, Edmund, you're experiencing fear right now as a panic syndrome. Can I give some advice? Fear and panic, it can be really tough to deal with those emotions, those feelings. There's no one piece of advice that works for everyone. So I've got a lot of, I guess you could say I've got a lot of expertise in dealing with mental health issues in terms of my work. I've got a special interest in mental health issues, and I've worked with many, many different people from many different backgrounds with varying severities of mental illness to help them. I'm not an expert, I'm not a specialist, but I do have some expertise in that area. And I think it's really beneficial to find a good counselor, or even a good friend, someone to talk to, someone who can be with you through your issues, somebody who can have a chat to you, because there isn't, in my view, a one solution fits all, one size fits all. Just to give you an example, for some people, a beneficial thing to do is to sit with the emotion, to allow yourself to feel the emotion, and to allow the emotion to come and go. Because the wonderful thing about panic is that it does usually go. If what you mean by panic is an intense rush or anxiety that emerges and then later dissipates, panic usually indicates a short-lived kind of anxiety, as opposed to what we would often call a generalized anxiety or a generalized anxiety disorder. But for some people, sticking with their feelings can actually cause problems, especially if there's been a lot of trauma. And sticking with the feelings can actually cause you to relive the trauma. If you're in a place that's strong enough where you're able to deal with that, then that can be beneficial. But for some people, it can actually set them back. So that's just one example of how there is no sort of fixed teaching when it comes to mental health issues. And I don't know how severe the anxiety is. It could be something quite mild, in which case you might be able to deal with it by yourself. You might be able to read some books on it, watch some YouTube videos on it, do some self-CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and deal with it that way. Or it might be much more deep-seated. It might go back into your childhood and things like that. So it's different for everyone. I really recommend talking to people that you trust. If needed, if it's interfering with your ability to do things in your daily life, especially if it's interfering with your relationships or your work, then I would really highly recommend seeing a psychologist or a counselor. And there's simple things you can do, like eating healthily, sleep well, reduce your caffeine intake. But I'm getting into my sort of doctor mode here. So let's get back to spirituality. Yeah, I hope that helps, Edward. Okay. Nathan, I feel good for feeling good's sake. So this is the gentleman who asked about the law of attraction. Where have we gone? Okay. I feel good for feeling good's sake, but I think it's a little woo-woo for me when it says that it brings outside things to me. Or maybe I am not mature enough to understand it. Well, that's that. I don't know if you're being sarcastic or not, but you know, that's really good, because and apologies if you're not. Yeah, I think whatever your view is on things like the law of attraction, can we approach it with an open mind? Personally, I don't have all the answers on all things, but I'm open to things, and I think that's important to say, look, I don't always know, but I'm open to it. I can't, you know, it might be that your experience is, oh, I have no evidence of the law of attraction as for the law of attraction working, but I'm still open to it. So I would encourage people to experiment and find out for themselves if they're interested in things like law of attraction or psychic things and whatever. It is a bit woo-woo. My personal experience, and you know, I don't want to impose this on anyone, and also, to be honest, the law of attraction it does have some importance in the spiritual search, but you don't need to know anything about the law of attraction to realize freedom. You know, the realization of freedom doesn't depend on knowing about things like the law of attraction. But my personal experience is that the law of attraction does work. It is quite powerful. But honestly, I don't know for sure. It's just my sense. I've got there are a lot of things that I have intuitions about, but I'm not really sure about them. But I have an intuition about, oh yes, this might be true, or I think this is true, or there's evidence suggesting in my personal experience that this might be true, but I'm not always 100% sure. Does that make sense? And Nathan, if you feel good for feeling good's sake, that's perfect. Because if in the law of attraction, if you feel good for feeling good's sake, you attract good things to you. So hey, that's working. Another thing I should mention, actually, with the law of attraction is some people, for those of you who might be into Hinduism or Vedanta, things like the Upanishads and the Vedas and the Bhagavad Gita, these texts are riddled with the law of attraction, or maybe riddled isn't the best word, but the law of attraction is everywhere in these texts. They say that whatever you think, that you become. And they're not just talking about Brahman and the self. They talk about it in lots of different ways. But interspersed throughout the Vedic texts, the Upanishads, the Vedas, the Gita, and various other texts, there are phrases that say that testify that the law of attraction is basically true. And there's this whole section of the Vedas which is about praying to gods and getting the worldly things that you want, so the materialistic things in your life, right? But I'm not an expert on that aspect of the Vedas at all. I'm more interested in the freedom teachings. But it's useful. It's, you know, if it's interesting to you, then by all means explore it. Gabrielle Viner, can you talk about money? Okay, money is an interesting one. Well, I don't know exactly what you want me to talk about. Is there anything if there's anything you particularly want me to talk about, then just put something in the comments and I can sort of respond a bit more directly. About spirituality and money, I personally don't think there's anything wrong with things like spiritual teachers asking for money. I have my own separate job, and I have an income stream and a way of supporting myself financially and a way of supporting my family and my dependents. So I ask for donations, and they're very gladly received, because to be frank, the more donations I get, the more time I can spend doing this kind of thing. But I don't rely on spirituality or being in this kind of role for a large part of my income. And to be honest, I get very little money from doing this. But if it's kind of being a spiritual teacher is your job, then it is very difficult. It's very difficult, especially if you're kind of a non-duality teacher, I think, because it's not actually, contrary to what people think, it's not actually very popular. There are other forms of spirituality which are much more popular. Let's put it that way. So I don't think there's anything wrong with a spiritual teacher asking for money. So I'm just saying, if you in like a lot of people who are interested in non-duality or spirituality, they have experience with Eastern traditions, and in the Eastern traditions, in these Indian-based traditions and these traditions that are from Asia, often the teachings weren't charged for, but there was a whole system in place of donations and tithes, where the community would often pay to support the local temples. A lot like how in England, which is where I am, communities used to pay a tithe or a tax to support their churches. The same kind of thing happened throughout India. And also, like, the Buddhist monks and the Hindu monks used to go around with their begging bowls. And people were expected, well, not expected, but it was common for people to give money and respect that path in life. Whereas that infrastructure really isn't here in the West. So I kind of feel, you might not agree with me, but I sometimes feel sorry for these spiritual teachers I see, and they're not earning very much money, and they're kind of just sort of scraping by, and then there's someone saying, hey, you know, you're just in it for the money. And you can clearly see some, you know, I'm sure some spiritual teachers are in it for the money, but I think a lot aren't. And yeah, pay them if you're getting benefit from them. And donate. Wherever the donate thing is on my screen, it's there. Donate. Click on the link. Donate if you're enjoying what you're hearing and if you're finding it useful. So yeah, is that okay about money? Gabrielle, is that Gabrielle? Yeah. I'll just take a break from reading the questions for a second. I feel like I've just been going non-stop. Well, thanks for joining. Those of you who are here watching, I hope you find it useful me being here. Really happy to try and answer any of your questions. So when we're talking about freedom is really simple. It's completely available here, right here and now. In a way, all these questions are kind of like detours and distractions, mind stuff, just sucking us off into different directions because the mind wants answers. And that's okay. Sometimes the mind needs answers, which is why I'm happy to answer. Freedom is actually just very natural. It's just the natural state. It's not something fancy or some extraordinary state. Although in a sense it is extraordinary, but it's just our natural, ordinary state. So if we're there, then there's no problem. And if there's no problem, then there's no need for a teacher or a teaching. And that's it. And you only need a teacher or a teaching, like, you know, what's happening over here with me and what I'm expressing, if there's a problem. A bit like you only need a doctor or a medicine if there's a disease or a problem in the body. But when you're in a state of physical health or physiological health, you don't need any medicines or teachings. And in a way, freedom is a bit like health in the sense that it's just normal and natural until something goes wrong. And that's when you need the teachings. And you know, the things that go wrong are fundamentally on the level of the mind. The mind meaning thought. So if we don't pay too much attention to our thoughts, then there aren't really any problems. But what tends to happen is the mind starts getting worried about that. The mind starts going, oh my gosh, but if I don't pay attention to thought, then won't my world end? Won't I starve to death? Or, you know, and it projects various scenarios and convinces itself that it needs, that thought is required, and convinces you not to ignore thoughts. So just about relaxing, letting go. And here it is. When I say here it is, there's nothing really here. It's just whatever is. That's the freedom. And we can legitimately ask about things like the law of attraction and money. There's nothing wrong with that at all. And actually, these are quite interesting topics in a way. But none of these things are really going to lead to freedom. As in, the answers to a question like that isn't really going to lead to freedom in the sense that freedom's here. So there's nothing you can attain really that's going to lead you to it. Perhaps you could say the recognition of it isn't here for some people, and then what you have to obtain is the recognition. The recognition, really, the fundamental recognition, as far as I can see, it's difficult to put into words, but to put it into words, the fundamental recognition is just realizing there's no separate entity, or there's no doer. But really, it's about not getting caught up in thought with all its concepts, because the concept of separation is only within thought. The concept of a me separate from life is only in thought. And that doesn't mean you can't think or thought can't be used, because it can. It just means seeing through the concepts of separation. Right, let's see if there are any other questions. Hi everyone who's joined. Okay, where are we? Just scrolling down through the comments. Edith, did you get from somewhere some psychic power on your journey? So again, a bit like some of the other questions, this really doesn't have anything to do with psychic powers. This really doesn't have anything to do with psychic powers. So if you believe in psychic powers, if you don't believe in psychic powers, if you think they exist, if you don't think they exist, it doesn't really matter. Psychic powers, if they exist, and I can tell you what my view is in a bit if you want, but if psychic powers do exist, I would say they're like skills that you can learn. Like it might be like being very good at playing chess. You know, you're very good at the psychic stuff, or you're very good at playing the piano. So you might, there's nothing wrong with being very good at playing chess. There's nothing wrong with being very good at playing the piano, obviously. And you can be interested in talking about these topics, but it's nothing to do with freedom. I can see there might be some kind of relationship, because often as the mind becomes purer, then these kind of powers become more manifest. So I'm giving myself away here in terms of my view. So I have had experiences with psychic stuff. I tend not to go into them too much in this kind of setting, because I think of it more as a distraction. But to put it simply, as you become calmer, then the psychic stuff generally becomes more manifest. Although for me, my psychic experiences really peaked probably prior to waking up. And then for the first couple of years after having woken up, it was very mundane, very boring. And then recently, recently, there's been a lot of things, like a lot of synchronicity happening all the time with me. Lots of synchronicity and, lots of evidence for things like the law of attraction. But again, I'm not an expert on these things. That's my experience. I could be wrong. It's not that it's interesting to me personally. Doesn't mean it has to be interesting to you. And I don't think it's that important in some ways, in terms of, I try and keep my teachings focused on freedom and freedom from suffering. And you don't need to know anything about psychic powers or the law of attraction really for that. But if it's a part of your journey, then so be it. Okay, where are we? What other questions have we got? Hi everyone for joining. Again, newcomers, hello. What is the shortest method to realize this freedom? Oh, awesome question. I wish I could answer it. It's a bit like the question we had earlier on anxiety. It's different for everyone. It's different for everyone. I would say the shortest answer is to find a teacher that you resonate with, that you feel connection with, and be with that teacher. That's what I would genuinely say. Now, someone like me, I never had a teacher because I didn't resonate with teachers. I was too critical. I always found something wrong with them. And I'm also quite independent. So I would try to do everything by myself. So even that advice doesn't work for everyone. Be true to yourself. This is not about believing things. This is about seeing things for yourself. If you can find a teacher who you resonate with, whether that's me or someone else, that's the way forward, I think. You know, having a teacher is so useful. I've guided several people to this freedom. And I think that their interaction with me was really instrumental, because it just, things that took me a long time, years to figure out, I could just show them in a few minutes or a few sessions. So, yeah. Oh, hold on a sec. I've got to plug in my laptop, otherwise it's going to die. So bear with me. Sorry. Oh gosh, okay. Let me turn the brightness of the computer down a bit. There we go. I hope everyone, I should have answered this before, but I hope everyone can hear me okay. I hope the video quality is okay. Is it all right? Give me a thumbs up if it is. Do I need to, sometimes if the video quality isn't good, I'll have to speak slower or something like that. So please let me know if you can't hear this properly, or the video's stilted or not coming across. Thumbs up happening. Cool. Oh, I love all these little icons just floating across. Makes me feel special. Thank you, guys. Yeah, so the shortest method, that's find a teacher you resonate with. If you find one teacher you particularly resonate with, stick with them. Again, it just didn't happen for me. So what happened to me was that I just flitted from one teaching to another teaching to another teaching to another teaching, dissatisfied with them all. And in retrospect, I can see why I was dissatisfied with them all, because none of them have quite got it right. And that's the thing, no teaching's really got it right, because you can't really put this into words. It's too simple. It's too simple to be put into words. It's too immediate. It's too direct. The very putting it into words can itself be an obstacle. It can make it sound like there's an object called enlightenment that you've got to attain. Whereas what we're pointing at really is that you're already free. Do you hear that, guys? You're already free. That means that you don't actually have to get anything. You don't even actually have to know anything. You don't even have to even get any special understanding about reincarnation or life after death or psychic powers or anything. You don't have to know anything, because it's already fully here. You don't have to do anything. Yeah. But having said that, understanding and doing things might be a part of your apparent journey in seeing this. Spiritual practices and inquiry and devotion can all be a part of it, and they were a big part of it for me. So it's funny how this works. One practice I think I'll quickly share with you before I move on to some other questions is can be a really effective practice for some people. Again, if you kind of resonate with the practice. See, there's no one practice that resonates with everyone. In fact, in my back gap interview, I mentioned a story about Yogananda, who's a very, very famous holy man from India who wrote a book called Autobiography of a Yogi. And he went to visit Ramana Maharishi. And Yogananda was on his way to the US. And he wanted advice from Ramana. And he said, Ramana, what is the best spiritual teaching? What is the kind of what Nathan's question is. What is the shortest method to realize this freedom? What should I teach the people when I go to the US? What's the best way of teaching Westerners? And Ramana just said, there's no single teaching that works. You can't dish out one instruction that works for everyone. And I think that's very true. And understanding that nuance is both good and bad. For me as a teacher, I wish I just had a teaching I could just give you, because it makes it a hell of a lot easier for you guys. And it makes it a hell of a lot easier for me, because then I can say, yes, what you do is you do this, you do that, and that's it. And then you can go, okay, great, I'm going to go home and do A, B, and C, what Tom said. But what you tend to find is that A, B, and C might work for someone, but D, E, and F works for someone else, you know. So anyway, let me share with you this quite effective sadhana, quite effective spiritual practice, which is just to relax and be quiet, allow yourself to settle down. And you can do this with me. Take a few deep breaths. And then come into contact with the sense of me. So, you know, you have a sense that I'm here, that for me, I'd use the word Tom, that, okay, there's Tom's here. And where is Tom? And I'd like to feel what Tom feels like. And maybe I've got a sense kind of here in my chest that here's the essence of Tom, or just behind the brow, maybe behind my eyes. This is where Tom is, and this is where the essence or center of Tom is. It's somewhere here. So really get a sense of, oh yeah, this is where Tom is. And then realize that whatever you're feeling is you, is me, is Tom or whatever. Obviously use your name, right? Realize that whatever you're feeling or seeing is something you're feeling, is something you're perceiving. Therefore, it's an object that appears to you. So it's an object, it's seen. So the fact that it's seen means that it's not the seer. It's not the one that sees. And in this way, you could say that is not who I am, because that's an object that's appearing to me, or that's an object that's appearing in awareness. Now, this is a really ancient and widespread practice. You find it in Vedanta. It's a form of self-inquiry, Atma Vichara. It's also found throughout the Buddhist world, both in Theravada Buddhism, which is the early form of Buddhism, and also in Mahayana Buddhism, which is like the later wave that came along a few hundred years later. It's also found in Tibetan Buddhist practices as well, the Vajrayana practices. You also get variations of it in Zen, which could be thought of as a form of Mahayana Buddhism. But basically, this practice is everywhere. There's a wonderful Buddhist teacher by the name of Ajahn Chah, who lived in the 20th century. He was of the Thai forest tradition. He used to teach this kind of meditation. He called it vipassana, which is what it's called in the Pali Buddhist texts. In Mahayana Buddhism, it's called vipassana. It's just the Sanskritized form of the word, vipassana. And in Vedanta, it's often called Atma Vichara. And it's just looking for the I and noticing that whatever you find whatever you think of as being you is actually just an object that appears to you. Now, there are a few things, because philosophically you can argue with this. You can say, well, just because something appears to me doesn't mean it's not me. And you can get into the whole argument about subject and object and whether there is such a thing as a true self or not, and all this kind of stuff. But my advice is don't worry about any of that stuff, because the practice isn't really there to give you philosophical understanding. It's not there for you to say, okay, now I know who I am awareness, I am the subject, and I'm not any objects. That's not the point of the teaching. The teaching or the practice is asking you to take that view, but not so you can gain some kind of intellectual, conceptual knowledge. The purpose of the spiritual practice is to disidentify you with objects, especially the body-mind. and especially thoughts or the mind. So just come and notice any sense of self that arises and say, that sense of self is something that is known to me. Therefore, I am not it. And then allow yourself just to sort of sink into awareness. Where you're meaning, sink into awareness, what does that mean? That just means you're not identifying yourself as being the body and mind. You're actually, what you're doing, you're identifying as awareness. In order to counteract the identification with the body and mind, it's a remedy. Because we're so identified, we're conditioned to identify as the body and mind. This practice is just doing the opposite. It's saying, stop identifying with the body and mind. Instead, let's identify with this thing called awareness, in order to counteract the false identification. And then when the job of the practice is done, you don't have to identify as awareness either. You can just let that go as well. And all there is what is. So that's a really nice practice. It can be very, very powerful if you resonate with it. The other very powerful method is surrender, especially if you believe in God, or if you don't believe in God, you can have the concept of the universe, and just to surrender to the universe and give thanks to the universe. It's such a powerful practice. It sounds too simple, sounds too good to be true. It sounds so simplistic that can't surely be it. But yeah, that can be a wonderful practice. The two, the gratitude practice, the surrender practice, and this self-inquiry type practice work really well together. And there are reasons why it works really well together. I won't go into it right now because I could probably talk for another half an hour on these things. But I hope that helps answer your question, Nathan. I'll go through. Let's see if we've got some other questions now. Edward, thank you very much for your kind words. Sandeep's got a question I can see. Rebecca's got a question as well. Harpramjeet has got a question about defining awareness. Very good question. Usually when I teach, I do define all my terms and I define everything properly, but I've just kind of whizzed through everything today. Maybe we can come back to that. Okay, let's look at Sandeep's question. Sandeep, hi Tom, my question relates to living spontaneously with an ease. I see that a lot of my energy goes in mental evaluation of the current situation and working out the best response, which is tiring. Yes, it is. It's very tiring. It's exhausting. It's absolutely exhausting. Can you address living in a natural state, as you mentioned in that context? Thank you. Yeah. So this isn't about, in a way, to put it very, very simply, Sandeep, and to anyone else who's thinking along these lines, living spontaneously. This is not about living spontaneously. This is not even about living with ease. But isn't this about freedom from suffering? Yes, this is about freedom from suffering. But this isn't about freedom from suffering at the same time. I'm sorry. I know I'm speaking in riddles. I will try and explain. Yeah, this is not about having any ideal of how to live, because that is inherently dualistic. Can you see that? Does that make sense? Because what you're doing, you're saying, here's me, a person, and I don't feel at ease, or I feel a certain level of discomfort or pain or negativity, and therefore my mind projects a second state of mind or a second state of being in which it feels better, basically. So really, the seeker, what the seeker really wants, the seeker might say they want to know about reincarnation or the law of attraction or about living with ease, but what the seeker really wants is to feel better. So, yeah, think about that for yourself and see if it's true for you. But I put that to you, that really what we're looking for is to feel better. And this isn't necessarily about feeling better. This is about being okay with whatever's happening. That's the freedom. The freedom is about, okay, great, something really nice is happening. That's nice. Okay, something not so nice is happening. Well, that's what's happening. oh, something not very nice is happening, and now the body is taking action to try and correct that. Okay, well, that's just what's happening as well. Oh, I've noticed that the body mind has just made a mistake in the way it's done something. Maybe it should have done something differently. Okay, yeah, it made a mistake. So, because life, it doesn't always feel good. Is that incredibly profound? Does anyone else realize that? Life doesn't always feel good. Of course it doesn't. So the mind then can project a state in which it always feels good, and then is trying to attain that. Do you get me? So the mind, generally speaking, is trying to attain a state of consciousness or a state of being which feels better. And that's the duality. That's the duality. And the non-duality is saying you don't really control how you feel. I mean, how are you going to feel tomorrow? Who knows how they're going to feel tomorrow? You've got no idea. I mean, you don't even know how you're going to feel an hour from now. And that is called spontaneous living, Sandeep. Just to sort of put it back in, I'm trying to be clever and use the words of your question. Because you said, my question relates to living spontaneously with an ease. Well, the spontaneous living is what's already happening. So I put a post up recently on my blog about prescriptions versus descriptions. So spontaneous living isn't like a state that you've got to attain. It's not a target you've got to achieve. It is a description of life. But because we consider ourselves to be a separate doer, because we think this is me here and I can do something, then we try and control. And then we try and improve the situation. Whereas actually, we don't know what's going to happen. One important teaching can be that any state of being or state of mind or state of consciousness that you achieve is a subtle object. It's an object that appears to you. So if you have an experience where everything feels really peaceful and really blissed out and wonderful, and I'm sure many of you have had experiences like that, whatever experience it is, maybe it's an experience of oneness, maybe it's an experience of timelessness, maybe it's an experience of peace. Whatever your experience, those experiences are known, aren't they? You are aware of them. If you're aware of it, that means it's an object that appears to you. It's a subtle object, meaning it's not something that you can perceive necessarily with the five senses. But it's an object nonetheless. And the golden rule about objects, again, you find this in all the traditions. The Buddha really stressed it. He said that everything comes and goes, or everything is intransient, everything is impermanent. Right? I think it's called anicca. I don't know how you pronounce it. See, I got a lot of my knowledge from reading books, so sometimes I know how to read the words, but I don't know how to say them. So I think it's anicca is the proper pronunciation, meaning impermanence. Or sometimes it's called emptiness. Emptiness means whatever you perceive, whatever you experience, whatever state of mind, state of consciousness, it's all empty, meaning it doesn't have any enduring substance to it. What does it mean if I say it doesn't have any enduring substance to it? It means it will eventually go. It don't last forever. So if you're looking for a lasting peace, a lasting freedom, you won't find it in any subtle objects. And living spontaneously, living with ease, is actually a subtle object. Do you see that? So you can try and get yourself into a more comfortable way of living. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But don't think it will necessarily last. I mean, if you find that, Sandeep, and everyone else, I hope it does last, you know. But we don't know when it's going to go. We don't know where anything's going to go. We don't know when our health's going to go. We don't know how, we don't know what's going to happen next. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Or maybe, maybe if you've got more developed psychic powers than me, maybe you know. But so living in the natural state just means not minding what's happening. And a part of what's happening might be minding what's happening. Make sense? So you might find yourself actually really caring about something. Well, that's okay. Often what happens to people on the spiritual journey is the opposite. Often you find that you stop caring about things that you used to be very passionate about. Maybe you were really into politics or animal rights, or whatever it is, in the stamp collecting, whatever it is you might be really into. And it's often what happens during the spiritual search is a lot of these interests and passions start to die away, because the fulfillment that we were gaining, the fulfillment we were deriving from these activities, from these pursuits, we start seeing through that. We start realizing that these things are also empty. Not that there's anything wrong in collecting stamps or being interested in politics, no. But if the motivation for doing those things was seeking a sense of fulfillment, then as we mature spiritually and as we start to feel more fulfilled, we become less interested in the objects of our desires. So a lot of these things start to fall away. And this is, again, this is the natural state. And then when you're in the natural state, you might find that you're interested in stamp collecting. Or you might find you're interested in something that you thought before wasn't that interesting. Maybe suddenly now you're really into painting. And before you thought, well, painting's just a waste of time. What's important is, like, I don't know, science and earning money and having a job and stuff like that. And painting's just a waste of time. But now suddenly you find yourself drawn to something completely different. Or maybe not. Or maybe not. So remember, all experiences come and go. And enlightenment, freedom, is not a particular experience. It's being okay with any particular experience. And that includes not being okay with something. So if you're not okay with something, then that's okay too. Yeah? Okay. Let's have a look at any other questions we've got. Well, thank you for everyone who's asked a question so far. Thank you so much. There's no teaching if there isn't a question, really. As I said at the beginning, if there's nothing wrong, then there's no need for teaching. It's only when there's a question. Okay, Rebecca, you've asked a question. Does the mind ever completely stop? It's a bizarre feeling. It's bizarre feeling a deep peace and then listening to the mental craziness. I'm sure many people can empathize with that, because especially if you're somebody who's able to access a deep peace in, say, meditation or something. I mean, I've always found it fairly easy to enter a very, very deep sense of peace very quickly in meditation. And I've never been that sort of strong a meditator. I've not had a sort of daily practice. But I did start when I was quite young. I started meditating, I think, before I was a teenager. My mother taught me how to meditate when I was really young. And I learned yoga and pranayama and things like that. So maybe it's because I started when I was young. But I think it was also my disposition just meant that meditation and peace came quite quickly to me. But these can be traps. They can also be wonderful. I mean, of all the traps to get caught up in, meditation, what's in Sanskrit it's called sattva, S-A-T-T-V-A, sattva, peace, purity. You can get really trapped in there because it feels so good. When your thoughts have gone and the peace comes in, it feels wonderful. And there can be a thought that, okay, all I've got to do now is prolong that. Yeah, prolong that sense of peace. But this isn't about attaining something, right? Because if you manage to prolong that sense of peace, you've then attained peace, which is that subtle object. Now, do you remember? I said it's a subtle object. It's something that's known to you. When you feel peaceful, that's an object that comes and goes. All objects, gross and subtle, come and go. They're all transient. They're all impermanent. Some stick around for a long time, but they all eventually go. So they cannot be relied on. Now, this is what in Sanskrit, in the Vedic text, they say it's not real. They say is it real? I mean, it's sat is a Sanskrit word for real, S-A-T, sat. And asat means not real. It's unreal, meaning it's impermanent. They don't mean the word real isn't used in the same way as we would use that word in the English language. It's used in a different sense, meaning that you can't really you can't really stand on it with firm feet. It's like building a castle on sand, because it's not real, meaning it's not firm, it's not stable, it's not solid, it's asat. Whereas if you want to build on firm foundations, you've got to build on something real, meaning something that's actually lasting and permanent, sat. So does the mind ever completely stop? Well, it might completely stop, but your question implies that it stops forever. The thoughts carry on. The thoughts carry on. So in that sense, the mind never stops. Maybe at death, the mind stops. But I'm assuming you're talking about, do thoughts stop whilst you're alive? No. Now, what about the teachers that say the mind stops or the mind is completely destroyed? You've got people like Ramana Maharishi who said that. And you've got other teachers like Robert Adams. If anyone's read any of his stuff or listened to any of his stuff, he says, there's no thought. Thought completely ends. Well, when you look into it in a bit more detail, what you find is that when people questioned him on this, because a lot of people did question him on this, and Ramana too, they say, well, thought doesn't end. Actually, the thoughts carry on. In fact, I was going to write a blog post on this. I haven't got around to it yet. Thoughts don't actually end. What happens is that the belief in a thinker ends. The belief in an entity, a separate entity, which is responsible for creating thoughts ends. And when that ends, it's like the mind's ended. It's like you've died. You haven't died, but it's like a form of death almost. And the thoughts then are kind of like they kind of have a different quality to them. And Robert Adams talks about this. Yeah, maybe I'll try and cobble a blog post together on this, and so you can see what Robert Adams says. But the mind doesn't actually end while you're alive. The thoughts continue, but the belief that there's a separate thinking entity, that's what ends. And that's why, and that belief in a separate entity is often called the ego, or the sense of I, or the sense of me. And sometimes it's called the mind being a synonym for ego. And so when that ends, it's like the mind's ended. So the Vedanta texts go into this in a lot of detail. And there's a particularly good text called Advaita Bodha Deepika. Let me see if I can write that down. Advaita, which you can download free from the internet as a PDF. I've just added it to the comments. I think it will appear in the feed. And it goes through exactly what it means. Again, you don't have to read that. It's a bit, it's quite a technical text, but it explains most of Vedanta in a fair amount of detail, and it goes into this, especially in the last couple of chapters. And it was one of Ramana Maharishi's favorite books. So it's got a seal of approval from Ramana Maharishi. Again, if you're into that kind of type of teaching, then you might find it useful to read. And it will help you understand a lot when people say the mind ends, what that actually means, because the text goes into it. The Advaita Buddha Deepika is written in the form of a conversation between the guru and the disciple, or the master and the disciple. And the disciple's asking all these questions, like the question that Rebecca just posed. And the guru initially says, there's no mind, the mind ends. And then the disciple's like, well, are you sure? I mean, don't thoughts continue? You look like you're thinking. And then the master's forced to explain. And again, if you can read Robert Adams, he talks about it as well in quite a good way. It's wonderful teaching, wonderful teaching. Yes, a bizarre thing, a deep peace, and then listening to the mental craziness. That's the thing. These things are objects that appear within awareness. They're objects that appear to us. They're going to come and go. Peace is an object. Peace is an object. Shankara called peace the last obstacle to realization. Because as you spiritually mature along the path, if there is such a thing as spiritual maturation, but let's just talk about it in that term for now, just so I can actually say something about it. Often as you progress along the spiritual path, again, another poor choice of words, but do bear with me, as you progress along the spiritual path, you become more peaceful and you become more joyous and things feel better. But the liberation might not be there, even though things are better. And eventually we let go of even needing to feel good. Now, this is something you shouldn't force. You shouldn't force, because sometimes people need to go through a long period of feeling good, especially if you've gone through a long period of feeling shitty for many years. Then it can be very nice to go through a period of feeling good and having access to this bliss. And here I'd encourage you to follow your heart. So does your heart say, actually, I need to dwell in this peace. I need to just be in this happy place, basically. Because that happy place, that peaceful feeling, if you can access it through meditation, through being quiet, through calming yourself down, that can heal. That's a very healing energy. I often feel it. I mean, every now and again, I will sort of go into meditation, experience a deep peace. And I often see a white light and I feel this sort of warm, wonderful energy come through and flush my system, flush my physical body and my sort of energetic body. And it's wonderfully healing and cleansing and purifying. It's lovely, it's beautiful. It's like a spiritual shower. It cleans you, it purifies you. But you don't need to stay in the shower forever. You know, eventually when you're clean, you step out of the shower, and you don't need to be in that peace forever. But it has a place, just as like having a shower has its place. Dwelling in peace, dwelling in purity is very purifying. It's very wonderful, and it can heal a lot of past hurts. So it's an important part of the journey. So don't try and force it where you don't care about being at peace. If your heart says, actually, you know what, I want a bit more of this peace, then go for it. And eventually you won't need it anymore. Eventually it'll just be a bit boring. It can actually be a bit of a pain, believe it or not. You can actually get tired of feeling, you think, oh, this is it. It's a bit much now. And you can emerge just ordinary. And this is when you become free of peace, free of sattva. Sattva is that peaceful energy. So, but if your energy is very low, like say you're very depressed, or your energy levels are feeling low, or you're very caught up in negative behavioral patterns, negative thought patterns, very anxious, or a lot of traumas going on, what you need often is to go to a better place. So this kind of becoming more passionate, becoming more enlivened, these practices become more important, like chanting and invigorating practices, dancing, these vital practices. So that negative energy, if you're feeling that negative energy state, in Sanskrit that's called tamas, or tamasic energy. And it can be really useful to sort of bring yourself up to a much more passionate state, which is called rajasic energy. And eventually, the Rajasic energy, it purifies you of the negative energy. This positive energy purifies you of this negative energy. And then eventually, this positive energy, you don't need it anymore. You don't need to feel good anymore. You don't need to follow your bliss anymore. See, follow your bliss is lifting you out of this drudgery, out of this tamasic negative energy. And when you've been lifted out of it, you don't need that all this positive thinking and positivity anymore. You can just sink down into peace. You see, you can sink down from rajas into sattva, to use the Sanskrit words. And then when you're in sattva, sattva itself can become a trap. And so then you just relaxed in sattva and peace. And then eventually you're free of it all. Okay. Hope that helps, Rebecca. Welcome to everyone else who's joined. Okay, how do I find awareness? Hopramjeet's question. My best friend stole my couch. How can I forgive her for this? I'm not sure if that's a serious question. Hi from Brazil. Love your teachings. Oh, thank you very much. Hi to you too. Did realization happen to me over a period of time in one go? It happened over a period of time. I don't really know when it happened. Was I pondering any particular teaching? No, it was a lot of, in fact, what happened to me towards the end of my spiritual search, I started feeling a huge sense of devotion and faith, which completely took me by surprise because I wasn't really that into devotion or faith. So I started feeling a lot of devotion and faith actually towards Ramana Maharishi and his teachings and his presence. And also to some of the Hindu gods. And, you know, in my upbringing, I was always exposed to all these different images and things of Hindu gods. So I started feeling a lot of devotion, and also towards Jesus as well. So anyway, a lot of devotional feeling and a lot of surrender. And then at some point I realized I hadn't been suffering for a long time. And I kind of realized I was awake, as it were, after I woke up, and I don't really know when it happened. I talk about it in my, I think I talk about it in both the sort of main interviews I've done on Conscious 2 and on Backgap. So check it out, Nathan. You can have a listen to me. Also on my website, there's an About Me section, and I'll put a link to a short excerpt of a video that talks about that if you're interested. Okay, awareness. Whew. That's a good question. Define awareness. Well, there are different ways you can talk about it. I usually talk about awareness in quite a specific way, but I always sort of warn people not to take the teachings too seriously, because teachings about awareness are conceptual teachings, and you can get caught up in the concepts, and you can start identifying with awareness and thinking that awareness is what you are, and what often can happen is that people end up as an ego that's now identified with awareness. So you just end up regurgitating the verbal teachings, the conceptual teachings, but the teachings haven't really sunk into the level of the heart. So the freedom isn't really truly experienced, but the mind is trying to assert that it is now awareness. And this is when you can get all the spiritual bypassing type stuff happening, because you're not really feeling, you're not really open to emotions and intuition and all that other beautiful aspects of life. But awareness simply is that which sees. It's just a way of talking about that which sees. It's an artificial, when I talk about awareness, we're creating an artificial duality, because there's this seamless experience, and we're now sort of dividing it into two. We're saying there's that which is aware, and then there's that which we're aware of. There's the subject and then the objects. And you could say, you could conceptualize awareness as being the subject, and then everything that appears to awareness is an object or a phenomena that appears to awareness. And then later on you can reconcile the two. You can say that the objects that appear to awareness are nothing but awareness. And you know, sometimes I'll go into these teachings and explain them in a bit more detail. So that's my general approach. I also find it quite useful to conceive of awareness as something that is just passively watching and doesn't do anything. Because I think that's quite useful. So I often say that awareness is not a doer. It doesn't do anything at all. It just watches. It doesn't think. It can't label. It can't choose. Thinking happens in the mind. Labeling happens in the mind. Choosing things happen in the mind. And awareness is aware of those activities, but doesn't do any of them. Just like the cinema screen analogy, in which the cinema screen doesn't do anything in the movie. It doesn't talk. It doesn't drive a car. That all happens within the dream or within the film. You got it? But awareness in itself doesn't do anything. Okay. Some questions about the couch. I think I'm missing something there. Or maybe I'm not missing anything. Thanks, Edward. I'm glad that just being here is making you feel peaceful. That's another interesting aspect of the teaching that I usually mention on my meetings, that there's the verbal aspects of the teaching, and there's also the non-verbal aspects of the teaching. And different people kind of hook on to different parts of it. When I was seeking, I was really interested in the verbal aspect. I was really interested in the words and the concepts because that's the way I was wired. But now, as I'm kind of sharing this, the non-verbal aspect of teaching is so powerful for some people, more powerful. And sometimes just through coming to a group and just being here can have a very powerful effect. It can have a very powerful purifying effect in which people feel at peace. And the thoughts, speaking to the question earlier, thoughts can really just lessen in the presence of someone who's living this realization, genuinely living this realization. And that's why when one person asked Ramana Maharishi, which is the best teacher? There's so many teachers out there. How do I know which one's the good teacher? How do I know which one's the crook? And Ramana just said to that questioner, find the teacher, find the guru that gives you peace, that gives you shanti. Shanti, the Sanskrit word for peace. So shanti, that's why almost all the scriptures end Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. It's peace, peace, peace. And it's the scriptures and the teachings are saturated and soaked in peace. So if anyone's listening, if you're able to kind of like hook onto that peace, that feeling that's emanating, then do it, because that in itself is a complete teaching. Actually, just being, that's satsang. Satsang means being with truth. That means being with the teacher. It means being with yourself. It means being with life. It means being at peace. And it's the peace that is always here. It's not the peace that comes and goes necessarily. It's the peace that's always here. But it's funny, because when the peace that's always here is recognized, then the experiential peace also tends to manifest more. Because the body mind is just not so concerned about things. It's not worrying about things. So it's allowed to function more naturally. And so peace naturally manifests more often than not. But the manifestation of peace, like any other object, comes and goes. So it's just not always there. It's just not always there. It comes and it goes like anything else. Mazin, really good listening to you again, Tom. Oh, Mazin, great to see you on Facebook here. That's awesome. Glad you can make it. I hope you're well. Yeah, it's been ages. Oliver, what are you writing? I found freedom here is actually suffering is intelligent reflecting, but often don't hear, for example. Oliver's talking about how even when suffering, and in his case, I'm sure he doesn't mind me saying it because he's put it on the comments board, but in his case it's panic attacks. even during that, there can be a sense of peace. And that's awesome if you can feel it. It's always here. It's always here. It doesn't matter what's happening. It doesn't matter if you're in a panic attack, if you're in an anxiety attack. This is where the awareness teachings, as I call them, can be so useful, because no matter what's happening, awareness is always here. It's always aware. It's always fine. It's always constant. It's always unharmed and untouched. Just like the cinema screen is always unharmed and untouched by the movie. It doesn't matter if it's a violent film or a love scene in the film or just a boring part of the film. The movie, the screen is always absolutely fine. There are no problems for the screen. So there's always this part of us. There's always this part of us that is untouched by life. That's always whole and complete, always free. And that can be whether you're shitting yourself, whether you're having a panic attack, whether you're really scared, whether you're like really irate and frustrated. You see, all of that stuff, all that negative stuff is allowed. So this is why it's freedom from suffering. Because the suffering's there, but you're free from it. Yeah? And when you're free from it, it's not suffering, even though it is uncomfortable. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to be comfortable. It's just natural. If you're in any discomfort, the body mind will naturally try and correct that discomfort, because the discomfort's a signal from the body or from the mind telling us that something could be improved or something's going wrong. Welcome again to all the new people who've joined recently. Thanks for being here. It's an honor to be here. It's kind of weird to be here on a Facebook Live. This is my first Facebook Live. I'm like speaking to a camera. I can see my own face on the screen in front of me, and I'm like talking to myself. Hey, what's new? Greetings from Sweden. Oh, thank you very much. Greetings to you too. Awareness is the observer. Yeah. So Harpremjeet, yes, awareness is the observer. Exactly. That's the way you can conceive it. Again, it's an artificial distinction, but it's a useful one to make provisionally. Provisionally means that you make the distinction for a period of time and then you let go of it. Like all teachings. All teachings, we use them, we pick them up, we use them, and when the job's done, we can let them go. And if we want to help someone else, then we can give them the tools that we've used along our way. And often, like the tools that I've learned, the spiritual tools that I've learned, like the awareness teachings and all the meditations and things like that, I often pick them up every now and again. If something comes up, I think, oh, I've got the tool for that. I've got this tool. And I'll use that and it'll help, and then I'll let go. Because all these teachings like awareness and stuff, they're useful if they're useful. And when their job's done, we can let go of it. If we cling on to the teachings, then we get stuck in concepts. And this is when we start arguing with other teachings, like, no, awareness is this, no, awareness is that. No, Shiva is the best God. No, Krishna is the best God. There is no God. It's about awareness. No, it's about God. It's about awareness. It's about God. There's free will. There's no free will. There's somebody here making it. There's no one. Oh, my gosh, you know. We don't have to worry about all that stuff. You know, we pick up teachings if they're useful to us, and then other people might find other teachings useful. This is my view anyway, you know, and obviously I don't mind if people disagree with me. That's fine. I'm just sharing what's worked for me, really, and what I've seen work for others. Yeah, it's actually really liberating, because you don't have to worry about, oh, I need to get this teaching just right, because the perfection's already here. You know, isn't that liberating? Even I know you might not feel, you may or may not feel that, and it might be, I don't feel it. I don't feel it. You don't have to feel it. And I know that might sound frustrating, but you don't have to feel anything. You don't have to realize anything. You don't have to have an experience. You don't have to have a realization. You don't have to have a wow moment. It's just too simple. It's too simple. It's too immediate. Isn't it wonderful? This is it, guys. This is it. It's freedom. The mind convinces us we're not free. I'm not free because of this. I'm not free because of that. You know, I don't know what awareness is. I'm not free. You are awareness. Awareness is here. Remember, don't cling to the words. See past the words. Let's see what other... I'm better live. Cool, that's good to know. Okay. Palmy deal. What are you writing here? Any advice for someone who has slipped back into the mind and back into its suffering ways, but knowing at a deeper level that it isn't the real you? Okay. The mind comes and goes, meaning thinking comes and goes. Sometimes the awareness is, sometimes when the thoughts come, you can be in this kind of lovely, blissful, semi-detached state where the thoughts come and go like clouds in the sky and everything's hunky-dory because you're not attaching to those thoughts. And that feels fine because thoughts are there, they're kind of like breezing along, and that's cool. And you're kind of that which knows the thoughts, you're observing the thoughts, and you're grounded in the sense of you, and everything's fine there. And then the real world comes along, and maybe you've got a tough job or something's happening in your life, a challenge, you run into a challenge in your life, and the body mind has to face that challenge, maybe. And in that moment, you get caught up in the mind, you're getting caught up in thinking. Your awareness, before it was on this spaciousness, your awareness was sort of hooked into this spaciousness, and the thoughts were allowed to come and go, and it was like, hey, everything's cool, dude. Yeah. and now it's like you just really zeroed into your thoughts. Like maybe you're trying to figure out the answer to a problem, and you're caught up in thought. Well, that's okay. You know, that happens. That's natural. That's a part of the natural functioning of the human being. When a challenge comes along, the body mind has to meet that challenge, and it has to engage in thought. So it gets caught up in thought. If you're living in the everyday world, that's what happens. If you're a renunciate, if you're living in a forest, or you're a monk and you're on retreat or something, if you're at a satsang like this, or you're on a retreat with a spiritual teacher, then you're in an artificial situation in the sense that you're not in your ordinary everyday life. So it's easy to feel blissed out and everything's coming and going. But when the point of what I'm sharing is the freedom in everyday life. And that's the freedom to actually get into your thoughts and get caught up in thoughts. You don't have to worry about getting caught up in thoughts. You don't have to worry about forgetting who you are. Did you know that? I'll say it again, you don't have to worry about forgetting who you are. You don't have to worry about getting caught up in thoughts. Why? Because you're never caught up in thoughts. Awareness is never caught up in thoughts. And awareness is always here, whether you know it or not. So it doesn't matter if you forget. Does that make sense? It doesn't matter if you forget. You don't see what can happen is the seeker, the mind, the thoughts, the seeker says, enlightenment is when I know this, when I know that who I am all the time, and I never get caught up in thoughts. So what's happened there is the mind has created an idea of what enlightenment is. And again, you've created duality now between where you are and where the mind wants to get to. Whereas the reality is, this is where you are. And if where you are is caught up in thoughts and forgotten who you are, well, that's the perfection that's arising right now in the moment, and that's okay. Isn't that liberating? Isn't it liberating and freeing to know that whatever happens, it's okay. On some sort of fundamental, deep level, it's okay. Isn't that wonderful? I hope that makes sense to you, Pari. one of the strange things about doing these Facebook Live things is that you don't get any feedback. So I hope what I'm saying is kind of working for the people listening. Will this video be on YouTube or Facebook? I hope so. I mean, does anyone know? Does this automatically record? Does anyone know? I assume it does. Can anyone write in the comments? No, I knew what you meant, Edward. I knew you meant better. Sorry, I was being sarcastic. No, I really do appreciate your comments. And I think it's just the way it is. The writing can get too intellectual, too conceptual. Edward's just writing down that he meant that I'm better live in person than compared to my blog posts. Thank you. Could I talk about a little more about spiritual bypassing and give a recommendation about meditation and sadhana, which is spiritual practice? Wow, don't have to have a wow moment. Thank you, Tom. You're very welcome. Yeah, why do we put conditions? Why do we put conditions on enlightenment? Why do we say, oh, I'm not enlightened because I feel this way or feel that way? That doesn't matter. Why do we say I'm not enlightened because I get caught up in my thoughts or I don't know who I really am? You are who you really are, aren't you? And if you can see that there's a part of you that's never touched by life, what we can call awareness or consciousness or whatever, that's enough, isn't it? Hi, Peter from Australia. Hi, everyone who's joined. Just curious, what about levels and conscious maps and spiritual methods depending on where you are? You're very welcome. Apparently I've already answered the question. Okay, yes, I have. I've talked about spiritual teachings. I've mentioned the 3 gunas, which are the 3 energies of tamas, rajas, and sattva. And depending, if you can sort of figure out what's your predominant energy level, tamas is the lowest energy state, which is when you're really feeling quite negative and in a lot of pain and a lot of suffering. And this is not about being judgmental. Like if someone is in that place, they think, oh, damn, I'm in tamas. It's not about that. It doesn't matter which one you're at. What matters is you recognize is where you're at. So tamas is the lowest energy state in the sense that it's the densest. You feel exhausted. You feel negative. You might feel trapped and weighed down. The next one up is rajasic energy, which is where you feel quite passionate and maybe you're quite active, but maybe there's a lot of anxiety or worry going on. Maybe there's a lot of addictive stuff going on. A lot of activity. You're not weighed down and still and unmoving and entrenched. You've got a lot of energy, but it might be negative energy. It might be a lot of addictive behavior, a lot of addictive tendencies, a lot of neurosis maybe, or maybe a little bit. That's the rajasic energy. And then you've got the sattvic energy, which is when you're at peace and you're calm. And each of these energy states have their advantages and disadvantages. But typically speaking, if you're tamasic, if you're in this low energy state, you need to pull yourself up to this high energy state. And the practices basically are follow your bliss. You might start dancing, singing, chanting. Affirmations are important here. Follow your bliss. And this is what people typically do. They'll do things that make them feel happier and more alive. And they'll crave excitement and thrill. If you try and if someone's very low in mood or feeling very weighed down and low in energy, and they try and do a peaceful practice like meditation or watching the breath or just be still, it doesn't work. It doesn't work very well, because what happens is you just say you tell someone who's very tamasic to be still. All that happens is that person now is just being still with their tamasic energy, and it just feels terrible. And these tend to be the people who don't like to meditate, who feel like they can't meditate, because it's not the right practice for them. Their heart will tell them it's not the right one for them if they listen to it. They'll know that they want to do something invigorating, enlivening. Similarly, when you've done that enough, eventually that too becomes a burden, and then you'll start to crave the peace. Naturally, you'll start to crave the peace. And this is when the peaceful practices become more important. And then eventually with the peaceful practices, that you get sick of those. Then what becomes more important are the insight type practices, the understanding practices, practice like vipassana, self-inquiry. And often it's not one or the other, a whole selection of things. You'll sort of oscillate between them all. And all three energies go through everyone anyway. So there's a little framework. Good. I'm really glad that people are enjoying this. Thanks for your comments. That's great. Does anyone know if this is automatically recorded? So if I, when I finish this video, will it automatically go onto Facebook? Does anyone know? If it is, I'll just leave it on Facebook and people can watch it. So let's see, where were we with the questions? Yeah, so that was about the spiritual maps and consciousness. I've done an article that some people have said they found quite helpful called Roadmap to Enlightenment. So have a read of that on my website. Let me see if I can find it and I'll post a link. And it talks about a spiritual map that I think is quite useful. It's quite practical, I think. And it's quite good, I think, in a modern context because we have access to so many different types of teaching. Just posted at the bottom of the comments now. We've got access to so many different traditions and types of teaching that can be very confusing. So I've written that as a brief overview. Well, it's not that brief, but I could have written a lot more. So in that sense, it's brief. So have a look at that if you're interested. Mariananda has asked, could you talk a little bit more about spiritual bypassing and give a recommendation about how one should meditate and do sadhana? So hopefully I've answered the question about sadhana. Follow your heart, do the one that works for you. If you feel that you want peace, then do the one that makes you feel peaceful. If you feel you want to be enlivened and energized and feel positive, then do that one. Because if you feel like you need positivity in your life, that probably indicates a predominance of negativity or tamas. And if you feel like you need peace in your life, that probably indicates a predominance of too much energy, too much frenetic or maybe even neurotic energy, or too much rajasic energy. And if you feel like you want to understand and inquire, it's either because you're cut off from your emotions and you're caught up in your head, or you're getting fed up with peace and sattva, this peaceful sattvic energy. Make sense? So in terms of spiritual bypassing essentially happens when you close yourself off to your emotions and your feelings. That's what I mean by spiritual bypassing. Maybe there's another way of looking at it. But it basically means when you convince yourself that you just avoid your feelings. And often it's people who are hooked into a very strong kind of conceptual teaching, often to do with consciousness or awareness. And this is one of the dangers in this kind of teaching about consciousness and awareness. You get trapped into these concepts. You say, I'm consciousness and my thoughts and feelings don't matter at all. That's true on one level. We shouldn't be overly worried about these things. But at the same time, we don't have, if they don't matter, then you can feel them. The body, mind can just feel them totally. If it's right for that particular point in time, in that context. So what I mean by that is if you're in work, maybe that's not the time to feel your emotions. Maybe you can wait till you get home from work, or if you're in the middle of a conference or something, you know. But essentially not to avoid the way you feel and to be true to yourself, to be brutally self-honest. If you allow yourself to feel and intellectually you're honest with yourself, then you won't bypass. But you've got to be honest with yourself. You've got to be honest with yourself. And you've got to allow yourself to feel. You've got to be unafraid to feel and unafraid to think certain thoughts. And then you won't bypass because you're not trying to push anything away. Okay, that's what I think. Right. I missed a question. Sorry. Is that Laurie? What's the relationship between the feeling of peace or love and the self? What's the relation between peace, love, and the self? So I was reading something else as well. In a way, there's no relation. You can say there's no relationship, because peace and love, if you're talking about the phenomena of peace and the phenomena of love, they're objects that appear in awareness, so they come and go. You see? And you can say, well, there's no relationship because they come and go and awareness is always present. And peace and love are just parts of the movie or the film or the dream that appear on the cinema screen. So there's no relationship. But the reality is that when the body-mind realizes that the screen of consciousness is untouched by life, that it's always okay, then it can start to relax. And when it starts to relax, when it starts to feel calm, peace arises. You see? When you're not suffering so much, then love arises. Because it's these are natural expressions of the human body. You could say it's just an expression of health. A healthy mind, healthy body and mind will feel at peace and will generally feel loving. You will naturally care about other people. But it comes and goes. It comes and goes. The peace, the phenomenal sense of peace and the phenomenal sense of love are not constant. They come and go because they're objects, they're subtle objects that appear within awareness. And then you've got another use of the word peace and another use of the word love, which is the peace these can also be synonyms for awareness. So awareness could be thought of as an absolute kind of love that's ever present, always embracing and loving everything that happens. And same with peace. Peace can also mean it's not a feeling or an experience of peace, just as the way we just used the word love isn't a feeling or experience of love. It's just a description of awareness. It's just another word we can use to describe awareness. It's the peace that surpasses all understanding. It's that which is always here watching, and it's at peace, meaning that it's never touched, it's never phased. It never experiences ups or downs, or it's always untouched. It doesn't move, it's always just the same. It's always the same. Okay, Kate Brady's asked a question. Hi, Kate. It says, hi, Tom, really enjoying this. Excellent, glad you're enjoying it. How about not pushing things away? How do you not push things away when you really want to push them away? What's the answer? That's a really good point, thank you. Well, it's okay to push things away. You see? You don't have to make this into an ideal. The mind will always make these teachings into an ideal. They'll always conceptualize them and say, okay, I've got the answer. The answer is not to push anything away. Oh, damn, I just pushed something away. That's a bad person, bad. So you see, that's what the mind does. Actually, it's okay to push things away. We're not pushing away, right? And it's natural to push things away sometimes. It's not, and in many different ways. Physically, if something's going to cause you harm, you might physically push it away, right? Psychologically, if somebody is invading your psychological space or trespassing your psychological or emotional boundaries, you know, then you might put up, you might say that's not acceptable that you talk to me like that. That's not acceptable, you treat me like that. You're psychologically or verbally pushing them away. You say, no, I don't like that. That's not on. That's not acceptable to me. You're asserting an emotional and psychological boundary. That's an important part of being a healthy human being, is knowing what your emotional and psychological boundaries are. Just as it is knowing what your physical boundaries are. Yeah. And we might be scared of something. Maybe we've got a psychological issue of some kind, and we're scared. We don't want to go into it. Maybe we've been traumatized in the past, and we think, you know what, I just don't want to go there. I don't want to go there. It's too scary for me. That's okay. You don't have to go there. Now, eventually you'll have to go there for that trauma to heal. But, you know, maybe that's not now. You know, maybe that's another time. Maybe that's in the future sometime. Maybe that's 5 minutes from now. Maybe it's 5 years from now. It will happen at its own pace. You know, we don't have to force it. That's okay. So pushing things away can be healthy, and we don't have to resist resistance. We don't have to resist pushing things away. We can observe and allow ourselves to feel that urge to push away, you see. You have that urge to push away. You have the urge to push away. You have the urge to force something away. And then you can notice, why do I want to push that away? Well, it feels terrible. I don't want to feel that way. And you can even explore it, maybe. And you can learn from it. It can give you insight. Whereas if you say, I should not push things away, what you're doing there, you've got a conceptual understanding which you're trying to adhere to. And that is the spiritual bypassing, you see? Because you're saying, I must not be like that kind of person. You're forcing yourself into a mold in which you're not fitting into. You just have to force yourself into it. So that's a form of psychological violence. You're committing psychological violence on yourself. For those of you who've read Jiddu Krishnamurti, he used to talk about this as being violence. He said this is like a form of violence to ourselves when we try and force ourselves into something where we don't really fit in there. And what you do, you prevent an intelligence from naturally emerging in which you can learn about yourself, in which you can learn about these aspects, these shadow aspects of yourself, these darker aspects of yourself. And through coming into communion with yourself, you see, communion meaning being open to and allowing the negative stuff, not acting out on it necessarily, not being destructive, but on a thought and feeling level, allowing it to arise if it feels right, if you're in a strong enough place to do that. See, sometimes the best thing to do when you've got an addictive tendency is just to quash it, just to push it away, because that's the best way to deal with it. But when it's less strong, then you can face it and you can allow it to arise up in you. You can understand it, you can observe it, and you can let it go away. But if it's too traumatizing or it's too strong and overpowering, then maybe you need to push it away for a bit. That's okay. Find what works for you. Learn about it. Don't have any dogmatic ideals. Take everything I'm saying with a pinch of salt. And if it works for you, that's it. Good for you. And if you find something else, then tell me. I'd love to learn. As I don't have all the answers. Freedom doesn't mean you have all the answers. So freedom just means that you realize freedom. It doesn't mean you know about politics. It doesn't mean you know about science. It doesn't mean you know about psychic stuff. It doesn't mean you've sorted all your issues out. But it makes life a lot easier. At least that's my experience. I know some people find it quite difficult when they're going through this journey. It can be quite isolating. A lot of psychological stuff can rise up. It can be quite tough. But again, that's why I sort of put myself out there to try and be some kind of form of support and do my bit. That's what, it's just naturally arising here. So I hope I can be of service. And if I am of service, I'm very grateful that I can be. Oliver's just said that I can share the video afterwards. That's great. I will do that in that case. And hopefully the audio quality would be, a couple of people have told me more than a couple of people have told me that my YouTube video, the audio is not always of fantastic quality. So I hope the quality of this will be slightly better. We'll see. So I'm just looking at all the comments. Oh, cool. How are we doing, guys? You all right? Oh, I'm pretty tired. I've been doing all this talking. I've been jabbering away for like coming up to 2 hours. Blimey. Well, let me know if you've because normally what we do, we meet most Thursdays. I usually meet twice a month in Kingston upon Thames, which is just on the outskirts of London in the UK. And then the other Thursdays in the month, I usually meet online, but I don't usually meet on Facebook. So let me know how you found this whole Facebook thing, and maybe I'll do it again sometime if it works for people. It's really nice to be here with you all. I can see all these little hearts and emojis floating across the screen, which is quite cool. But I don't think it tells me who's doing them. I don't know. Is that right? I was going to say, any questions? And a question just popped up about my facial hair. My facial hair started off as laziness, and then as the days wore on, I thought, well, you know what? I fancy a bit of a change. So I thought I'd see how it goes. And who knows? I might. I took. So I'm just thinking about something that happened today. So I picked up one of my kids from school today, and he's 5 years old. One of his friends walked past me and said, "When are you shaving your moustache?" I thought, gosh, okay. I said, "I don't know." And he goes, "Well, my dad's got a moustache and he's going to shave it off." I'm like, "All right, that's great." But there you go. You know, the children are saying that they want me to get rid of my moustache. So there you go. I don't know. I'll see how it goes. It's very easy to get very conceptual about these teachings and to fall into a particular way of talking or thinking about the teachings. And that's fine. If you find a way that works for you, then stick with it. But just realize it's so open. It's so vast. This is why things like inquiry and exploration, quite scientific inquiry, can go hand in hand with faith and devotion and images of Indian gods and things like this, and quite esoteric things like chakras and nadis and all this kind of stuff. So all this stuff can actually go together. It's wonderful, I think, the different ways it can be expressed. I would suggest following your heart, Finding a practice that either lifts you up, if that's what you need. Finding a practice that settles you down, if that's what you need. Noticing, looking for the sense of me, the sense of self. And getting to know that sense of self. And then noticing that it's an object, that it's not you, the subject. And just continuing that practice, that can be really powerful. You can almost tell how powerful a practice or a teaching is, or how widespread it is in different traditions. That practice you find everywhere. So you see, these teachings are just, they spontaneously arise in human beings because it's just a part of being human. So you can't really get rid of this teaching. It always just rises up in different forms wherever you go. All right, has anyone got any other questions? Do ask if you want to ask anything. Thank you very much, Lenka, for your very kind words there. I really appreciate them. You're really kind to me. Thank you. Thanks to everyone for all your comments, for being here, for all the icons I can see floating past my screen. Have I missed anyone's questions? Apologies if I have. Please just post them again because I'm looking right at the bottom of the comments now. So if there's anything I missed, please don't be angry at me. Just post it and I'll answer it now. Otherwise, we'll hang on for a few more minutes. If you're somebody who's quite into your thoughts and your mind, I'd really recommend some kind of more emotional type practice that can open you up to feelings. And if you are someone who's very much stuck in your mind or in your thoughts, you'll feel stupid when you first do it. You'll feel wrong. It won't feel right because you're not used to it. But try it. Try praying. I think prayer is a wonderful practice on many different levels. Try talking to God. Yes, it will feel strange. You might feel like an idiot, but try it. Try devotion. Try chanting. Try gratitude. Try singing. Be open to what life gives you. The ultimate teacher, that is life, or God, the Sadguru, true Guru, life, that brings us all here, brings us all together, teaches us everything we need, it purifies us, life gives us wisdom. We can give life gratitude, we can give thanks to God. You know what? Are there any more questions? Every week Facebook would be great. Well, maybe, who knows? Maybe we'll be able to do it. All right, well, let's give thanks to God. Let's give thanks to life. Let's give thanks to me. Let's give thanks to you. Let's give thanks to Facebook. Let's give thanks to everything that's enabled this to happen today. I really appreciate you all being here. I hope you've enjoyed it. If this video is saved, I will post it on Facebook and I'll see if I can figure out how to post it on YouTube as well. So my gratitude and my thanks to you all. My love to you all. I hope you're well. You stay well, stay happy, and I wish you peace. Take care. Bye now. Thank you.